Quit resisting ghetto trash. This is where animals learn to stay down. Her cheek hit the brick wall, skin scraping as a gloved hand mashed her head sideways, grinding her phone into the mortar beneath her face. Laughter burst behind her, sharp and casual, like this was sport. Heavy weight pressed her into the bricks while rough hands forced her head back, daring her to look up at the blue lights flashing approval. She tasted blood and iron, felt the vibration of her phone still buzzing under her palm, still connected. They saw a black woman and decided that meant silence, obedience, erasure. None of them knew she'd already called someone, and that call was climbing straight past their precinct. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day. The midday sun beat down on Rochelle as she stepped out of First National Bank, gripping her client's deposit slips and the sealed manila envelope. The summer heat made the concrete sidewalk shimmer, but her thoughts were already on her next appointment across town. She heard the patrol car before she saw it, the low rumble of an engine idling too close to the curb. The black and white Crown Victoria crept alongside her at walking speed, like a shark following a swimmer. Rochelle kept her pace steady, her spine straight. She'd learned long ago that showing fear only invited trouble. Officer Clay Rudd sat behind the wheel, his muscled forearm hanging out the window. In the passenger seat, Officer Brent Haskins watched her with an unsettling smile, like he was already enjoying a private joke. "Ma'am," Rudd called out, his voice carrying across the busy sidewalk, "need you to stop right there." Rochelle paused, keeping her movements deliberate and smooth. Her right hand drifted to her phone in her jacket pocket, pressing the emergency recording button without looking down. The device vibrated once to confirm it was capturing. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice clear and professional, the same tone she used with difficult clients. "You match a description we received," Haskins said, still wearing that strange smile. "Going to need to see some ID." The lunch crowd flowed around them like a stream around rocks. A hot dog vendor's cart released clouds of savory steam nearby. 2 elderly women stood at the crosswalk, clutching their purses and watching the scene unfold. No one intervened. No one ever did. "What description would that be?" Rochelle asked, though she already knew they wouldn't give her a real answer. She'd been through this dance before. Different cops? Same steps. "Just cooperate and this'll go quick," Rudd said, his tone hardening. He stepped out of the cruiser, his hand resting casually on his belt near his weapon. "I'm happy to cooperate," Rochelle said, maintaining eye contact. "But I'd like to know what description I supposedly match and what incident you're investigating." Haskins climbed out of the passenger side, chuckling. "Look at this one, Clay. Thinks she's a lawyer." "I'm a tax preparer," Rochelle corrected him, keeping her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. "I just left the bank with client documents. I can show you my business card." "Did I ask what you do for a living?" Rudd cut her off, stepping closer. His badge caught the sunlight, number partially obscured by his positioning. "Hands where we can see them." Rochelle raised her hands slightly, still holding the bank documents. Her phone continued recording in her pocket. More pedestrians had stopped to watch now, some pulling out their own phones. Haskins noticed, and moved to block their view. "Against the wall," Rudd ordered, gesturing to the brick facade of the empty storefront beside them. The building had been vacant for months, its windows papered over. "I haven't done anything wrong," Rochelle stated firmly. "You still haven't told me what description I supposedly match or what crime was committed. You want to debate police procedure?" Rudd's face darkened. "That what you want to do right here?" "I want to understand why I'm being stopped," Rochelle insisted, knowing she was within her rights, but also knowing how little that sometimes mattered. "I'm a business owner. I have client materials." Business owner. Haskins laughed again, that same unsettling sound. Clay, you hear that? We got ourselves a real entrepreneur here. More onlookers had gathered, but they maintained a careful distance. The hot dog vendor had suddenly become very interested in adjusting his umbrella. The elderly women at the crosswalk clutched each other's arms, their faces pinched with concern. Last time, Rudd growled, stepping directly into Rochelle's path. His bulk cast a shadow over her. Face the wall. Rochelle felt her heart hammering but kept her expression neutral. She knew this moment, the pivot point where things could go very wrong very quickly. Her phone was still recording. Witnesses were watching. But experience had taught her neither of those things guaranteed safety. Officer, she tried one more time, I'm happy to provide ID and answer questions, but I need to know— Enough! Rudd's hand shot out toward her arm. Against the wall. Now! Haskins moved to flank her other side, still wearing that anticipatory grin. The brick wall loomed before her, its rough surface sun-bleached and weathered. Just another routine stop, they'd claim later. Just following procedure. Nothing personal. Rochelle looked at the wall, then at Rudd's face. His eyes held no room for discussion, no space for rights or reason. She thought of her mother's warnings, of countless similar stories that ended in bruises and broken bones, and official reports that never told the true story. Her fingers tightened on the manila envelope as Rudd reached for her shoulder. The recording continued in her pocket, capturing every word, every sound. Whatever happened next would not disappear into silence. The rough brick scraped Rochelle's shoulder as Rudd forced her backward, his fingers digging into her arm hard enough to leave marks. The sun-warmed wall radiated heat through her light summer blazer, but she felt cold inside, a familiar chill of knowing what could come next. I'll ask one more time, Rochelle said, keeping her voice steady despite the pressure against her chest. What crime am I suspected of committing? Rudd's face twisted. The question hit him like a match to kindling. You want to keep running that mouth? He snarled, spittle flying from his lips. Before Rochelle could brace herself, he yanked her forward by her arm, then slammed her head back into the brick wall. The impact exploded behind her eyes, a white-hot burst that made the world lurch sideways. Pain bloomed across the back of her skull, sharp and nauseating. A laugh cut through the ringing in her ears. Haskins stood a few feet away, rocking on his heels with his thumbs hooked in his belt. He wasn't trying to hide his enjoyment. His face was lit up like he was watching his favorite TV show. See, that's what happens when you don't listen, Haskins said, his voice dripping with mock concern. This is compliance training, sweetheart. Best hold still and take notes. Rochelle's vision swam, fragments of the scene breaking apart and reassembling wrong. The sidewalk seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She could taste copper in her mouth. She'd bitten her tongue when her head hit the wall. Her client's documents had scattered across the concrete, the manila envelope torn and contents spilling out. Someone in the growing crowd gasped. "Stop it!" a woman's voice called out. "You're hurting her!" But no one stepped forward. No one intervened. They stood in their bubble of safety, recording on phones or averting their eyes, as Rudd wrenched Rochelle's arms behind her back. The handcuffs snapped around her wrists, metal teeth biting into her skin. "Still want to discuss police procedure?" Rudd growled in her ear. His breath was hot against her neck, reeking of coffee and something sweet. Still feeling smart? He shoved her face first into the wall again, grinding her cheek against the rough brick. The motion was practiced, almost choreographed, like he'd done this exact move countless times before. Like this spot on this wall had seen this scene play out over and over. Rochelle's head throbbed. Each heartbeat sent fresh waves of pain shooting through her skull. But through the haze of hurt and humiliation, She clung to one crucial fact. Her phone was still clutched in her right hand, pressed between her palm and the small of her back where Rudd had cuffed her. The recording light would be blinking, capturing every word, every sound, every laugh. "Look at that face," Haskins said, stepping closer to inspect his partner's handiwork. "Bet she won't be giving any attitude to the next officer who stops her." "Right, sweetheart?" Rochelle didn't answer. She focused on staying upright as spots danced across her vision. The summer heat suddenly felt oppressive, suffocating. Sweat or blood, she couldn't tell which, trickled down the back of her neck. "Nothing to say now." Rudd yanked her away from the wall, spinning her toward the waiting cruiser. "Lost that smart mouth real quick, didn't you?" The movement sent the world tilting again. Rochelle stumbled, her legs unsteady. Rudd's grip on her arm was the only thing keeping her from falling. The crowd parted as he dragged her forward, faces blurring together in her wavering vision. Some looked away in shame. Others kept their phones raised, documenting but not helping. The elderly women who had been waiting at the crosswalk were crying now, holding on to each other. The hot dog vendor had abandoned his cart entirely, retreated to the doorway of the bank. A young man in a business suit took half a step forward, then stopped when Haskins glared in his direction. "Just following procedure," Haskins announced to the onlookers, still wearing that satisfied smile. "Nothing to see here, folks. Just maintaining order." Rochelle's shoulder slammed into the side of the patrol car. The impact sent fresh pain shooting through her body, but she forced herself to focus. Her phone was still there, still recording. Her fingers, though trembling, found the familiar pattern of buttons on her screen. As Rudd grabbed her head to force her down into the back seat, Rochelle drew in a deep breath. Her vision was blurred. Her mouth tasted of blood, but she had one chance to make this call count. One opportunity to turn this moment of powerlessness into something else entirely. She pressed the screen, feeling the slight vibration that confirmed the connection. Now she just had to find her voice, had to push the words out through the pain and fear, had to make them clear enough to be understood. Rochelle's head throbbed as she lifted the phone slightly, keeping it hidden against her back. Blood trickled down her neck, and the world tilted at sickening angles, but she forced herself to focus. Haskins leaned in close, his face filling her wavering vision. "Who you gonna call, sweetheart?" he taunted, lips curled in a predatory smile. "Your lawyer? Maybe Mama? Go ahead. Tell them all about your attitude problem." The phone connected. Rochelle drew in a careful breath and spoke, her voice strained but clear. "I need the blue folder." The change on the other end was instant. Special Agent Mercer's casual greeting vanished, replaced by razor-sharp attention. "Location? Now." "First National Bank on Madison," Rochelle said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Corner of 8th Street." Haskins laughed harder, clearly enjoying what he thought was desperation. "Look at you, trying to sound all official. Nobody's coming to help you. Badge means we make the rules here." "Officers Clay Rudd and Brent Haskins," Rochelle continued, enunciating each name despite her swelling lip. "Badge numbers 4479 and 4832. You hearing this?" Haskins called to his partner. "She's taking names like she's somebody important." Rudd slammed the cruiser door hard enough to make Rochelle wince. He pulled out his notepad and started writing, his movements sharp with anger. "Let's see how many violations we can stack up. Resisting arrest. Assaulting an officer. Stay with me." Mercer's voice came through the phone, low and urgent. "Are you injured?" "Head trauma," Rochelle managed. "Wall impact, twice." "Do not lose consciousness," Mercer ordered. "Stay alive." "We're 3 minutes out." Haskins was still performing for the crowd, gesturing broadly as he spoke. "See, folks? This is what happens when people don't respect authority. They think they can talk back, make phone calls, file complaints. He leaned down to Rochelle's level again. But guess what? In this town, a badge outranks everything. Every judge, every lawyer, every... He trailed off as the first unmarked vehicle squealed around the corner. It was a black SUV with dark-tinted windows, and it came in hot, tires biting the asphalt as it stopped hard at the curb. Two more identical vehicles appeared seconds later, boxing in the patrol car. The crowd shifted, murmuring, phones still raised. Rudd's pen froze mid-sentence. Haskins straightened up, his smirk faltering for the first time. The SUV doors opened in perfect sync. Special Agent Mercer stepped out first, his FBI windbreaker a slash of authority against the bright day. He didn't rush or shout. He moved with the calm precision of someone who knew exactly how this would end. Other agents emerged behind him, already moving with purpose. "Step away from her," Mercer said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "Hands where we can see them." "Now hold on," Haskins started, raising his palms but not backing up. "This is a local police matter." "Hands on your head," one of the other agents ordered, already moving to flank him. "Do it now." Rudd's notepad clattered to the ground. "You can't just—" "Officer Clayton Rudd," Mercer cut him off. "Officer Brent Haskins, you're both being detained pending federal civil rights violations. Hands behind your backs." The agents moved in smoothly, professional and efficient. Haskins tried to step back, but strong hands caught his wrists, spinning him around. The handcuffs clicked shut with surgical precision. His face had lost all trace of amusement, replaced by something closer to fear. Rudd put up more resistance, muscles tensing as two agents approached. "This is bullshit. We were conducting a legal stop." "The legal stop, where you slammed her head into a wall?" Mercer asked quietly. "That legal stop?" More cuffs snapped shut. The crowd had grown larger, dozens of phones capturing the moment these officers lost their power. The elderly women who had witnessed the initial assault were crying again, but now they were smiling through their tears. Another agent was already working on Rochelle's handcuffs, careful of her injuries. "Ma'am, we have medical response incoming. Can you tell me if you're experiencing dizziness or nausea?" Rochelle's vision was still unsteady, but she forced herself to focus on Mercer as he approached. His face showed no satisfaction, no triumph, just calm professionalism as he supervised his team securing the scene. "Your phone," he said quietly. "Is it still recording?" "Yes," Rochelle managed. "Good. We'll need that, along with the surveillance footage from the bank and any civilian recordings." He turned to address the crowd. "If anyone captured video of this incident, please remain on scene to provide contact information." Dozens of hands went up, still holding phones. The hot dog vendor had returned to his cart and was offering water to the elderly witnesses. The businessman who had almost intervened earlier was already typing his information into an agent's tablet. Haskins and Rudd stood in their own handcuffs now, their expressions a mix of disbelief and growing dread as they watched their control evaporate in the summer sun. No more laughter, no more taunts about badges and power. Just the weight of consequences settling over them like a heavy blanket. "Check her head," Mercer directed the medics who had just arrived. "Possible concussion, definite trauma. I want full documentation of any injuries." Rochelle felt gentle hands guiding her to sit on the bumper of an ambulance she hadn't even noticed arrive. The world was still spinning, but something else was spinning with it now. The wheels of justice, already in motion, powered by one phone call and the evidence she'd managed to collect. The EMTs worked methodically, pressing fresh gauze against the gash on Rochelle's temple. She winced at the pressure but kept her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. Special Agent Mercer stood like a human barrier between her and the local officers, his stance casual but unmistakably protective. "I need their phones, tablets, and any recording devices," Mercer directed his team. "Standard evidence protocols." One of the federal agents approached Haskins, who had lost his earlier swagger. "Remove your vest slowly. Keep your hands visible." As Haskins complied, the agent's gloved hands found something unexpected. A small camera clipped underneath, its red light still blinking. The device was barely larger than a pack of gum. Definitely not department-issued gear. "Well, well," the agent said, carefully detaching it. "What do we have here?" Haskins's face drained of color. "That's personal property." "Not anymore," Mercer replied without looking at him. "Tag it and bag it. Check the other one, too." The crowd had thinned somewhat, but those who remained continued recording. The hot dog vendor had pulled his cart closer, providing free bottles of water to the witnesses giving statements. The elderly women who'd seen everything sat in folding chairs someone had brought from the bank, their hands trembling as they sipped water and described what they'd witnessed. Rochelle pressed her fingers against her throbbing temple, trying to focus through waves of dizziness. An EMT gently moved her hand away. "Try to stay still, ma'am. We need to control this bleeding." A black department SUV rolled up, and Sergeant Vance Pike emerged, all polished authority and practiced concern. His smile was perfect, professional, empty. "There seems to be some confusion here," he announced, approaching with measured steps. Mercer didn't move from his position between Pike and Rochelle. "No confusion, Sergeant. Your officers are subjects in an ongoing federal civil rights investigation. Please maintain your distance." Pike's smile flickered, but held. "Surely we can handle this internally. These are decorated officers with clean records." "We're decorated," Mercer corrected mildly. He gestured to another agent who was collecting Rudd and Haskins' badges and service weapons. "They're now suspended pending federal charges. You're not to approach or communicate with Ms. Gaines in any way." "Is that clear?" Pike's eyes hardened even as his smile remained fixed. "Crystal clear, Agent Mercer." He turned away, already pulling out his phone. The EMTs helped Rochelle onto a gurney. Her head spun with the movement, and she fought back a wave of nausea. "The evidence," she managed to say. "My phone." "Already secured," Mercer assured her. "Focus on getting treatment. We'll need your statement later, but health comes first." The ambulance ride was a blur of vital sign checks and concussion assessments. At urgent care, the doctor cleaned and stitched her head wound under bright lights that made her eyes water. 7 stitches total, plus butterfly bandages for the smaller cuts. "You're lucky," the doctor said, finishing the last stitch. "Head injuries can be much worse." "Any loss of consciousness?" "No," Rochelle answered. "Just dizziness and nausea. Classic concussion symptoms. We'll run a few more tests to be safe." Hours passed in a haze of CT scans and neurological checks. Outside the windows, the bright afternoon faded into dusk. Finally, the doctor returned with discharge papers and prescriptions. "Bed rest for at least 48 hours, she instructed. "No driving until the dizziness passes completely. Take the pain medication as needed, but don't hesitate to come back if symptoms worsen." Rochelle nodded carefully, wincing at the movement. A nurse helped her into a wheelchair, hospital policy for discharge, while reviewing the warning signs of worsening concussion. "Someone's here to drive you home," the nurse said, wheeling her toward the exit. Rochelle expected to see her mother, but instead found Agent Mercer waiting in the lobby. He stood when she approached. "Your mother's at home," he explained. "We have agents watching the house just as a precaution. I'll drive you." The summer evening air was cooling as they stepped outside. Mercer helped her into his unmarked car, then walked around to the driver's side. As he started the engine, Rochelle's phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, squinting at the screen through her headache. The notification made her stomach clench. "Court notice. Criminal charges filed." "They're charging me," she said quietly, reading the details, "resisting arrest and assaulting an officer." Mercer's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but his voice remained steady. "Pike's trying to muddy the waters. Standard intimidation tactic. Don't worry about it right now. You need rest." "They're saying I attacked them," Rochelle continued, anger cutting through her exhaustion. "After what they did? We have video evidence from multiple sources," Mercer reminded her. "Your phone recording, the bank's security cameras, witness footage, and that unauthorized camera we found on Haskins. They're throwing charges at you because they're scared." "Of what?" "Of what that camera might show. Of what you might have seen or heard. Of federal investigators asking questions they can't control the answers to." He glanced at her. "Pike knows his department's about to come under intense scrutiny, and he's trying to discredit you before you can testify." Rochelle leaned back against the headrest, closing her eyes against the streetlight's glare. Her head throbbed in time with her pulse, and the pain medication was wearing thin. But underneath the physical discomfort, a different kind of ache was building. The weight of knowing this wasn't over, that the real fight was just beginning. Miss Laverne stood frozen in the doorway, her hand pressed against her chest, as she took in the sight of her daughter's injuries. The porch light cast harsh shadows across Rochelle's swollen face, making the bandages look stark white against her darkening bruises. "Oh, my baby." Miss Laverne's voice was barely a whisper. She reached out with trembling fingers but stopped short of touching Rochelle's face. Mercer waited until Miss Laverne had guided Rochelle inside before saying quietly, "I'll have agents watching the house. Call immediately if anything seems off." Inside, Miss Laverne's kitchen felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the day. The familiar scent of lemon cleanser and fresh coffee wrapped around Rochelle like a comfort blanket. Her mother filled a bowl with warm water and gathered clean washcloths, moving with the precise efficiency of someone keeping their emotions tightly controlled. "Sit," Miss Laverne instructed, pulling out a kitchen chair. The local news played quietly from the small TV on the counter, footage from earlier showing Rudd and Haskins being led away in handcuffs. But the anchors' voices carried a skeptical tone that made Rochelle's stomach turn. "Sources within the department suggest the suspect became combative during a routine stop," one reporter said. "Questions are being raised about potential anti-police bias." Miss Laverne's hands stilled for a moment as she wrung out a washcloth. "They always try to make the victim into the criminal," she said softly. "Some things never change." She began cleaning dried blood from Rochelle's hairline with gentle, methodical strokes. Rochelle's phone buzzed continuously on the table. Each notification felt like another small wound. She scrolled through her business email, watching client relationships crumble in real time. "Need to postpone our appointment indefinitely. Given recent events, we'll be seeking services elsewhere. Very concerned about the situation." The words blurred together, a chorus of abandonment dressed up in polite business language. Rochelle had spent years building her reputation, earning trust through meticulous work and absolute professionalism. Now Pike's machine was grinding that reputation to dust. "Let me see that phone," Miss Laverne said, taking it from Rochelle's hands. She scrolled through the messages, her expression hardening. Cowards, all of them. Running scared because that's what those police want. A flicker of movement caught Rochelle's attention. Through the living room window, she spotted a patrol car parked across the street, its headlights off but engine running. The interior lights were dimmed, but she could make out two shadowy figures inside. "They're watching us," she said. Miss Laverne moved to the window, drawing the curtains with a sharp snap. "Let them watch. We've got nothing to hide." But her voice carried an edge of worry she couldn't quite disguise. Rochelle checked her phone recording from earlier, relieved to see the confirmation that it had automatically uploaded to the secure server Mercer had set up months ago. It was part of their protocol. Any interaction with local law enforcement went straight to encrypted FBI storage, beyond the reach of department tampering. A text from Mercer lit up her screen. "Do not speak to local investigators." The warning was unnecessary. Rochelle had no intention of saying a word to Pike or his people. But the fact that Mercer felt the need to send it made her wonder what was coming next. Miss Laverne set a mug of chamomile tea in front of her. "Drink this. It'll help with the headache." She sat down across from Rochelle, her own hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "Now tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." Rochelle recounted the day's events while her mother listened in silence, the only sign of her distress showing in her whitening knuckles around the cup. When Rochelle described the sound of Haskins laughing as Rudd slammed her head into the wall, Miss Laverne closed her eyes briefly. "I remember that laugh," she said quietly. "Different faces, different years, but always that same laugh. Like they're enjoying themselves." The patrol car outside killed its engine but remained parked, turning their living room into an impromptu stage. Every movement near the windows felt watched, evaluated, noted down. "They want us scared," Miss Laverne observed, rising to make fresh coffee. "They want us jumping at shadows and second-guessing ourselves. That's how they keep control." Rochelle touched her bandaged temple gently. The pain medication was wearing thin, allowing sharp twinges to break through. "I'm not scared," she said. "I'm angry." "Good," her mother replied. "Anger keeps you sharp. Fear makes you sloppy." The house creaked and settled around them as the night deepened. Miss Laverne refused to go to bed, instead setting up watch in her favorite armchair with her Bible and reading glasses. Rochelle tried to work on her laptop, but found the screen's glare intensified her headache. Around midnight, Miss Laverne went to check the porch light, a nightly ritual she'd maintained for decades. When she opened the front door, she became absolutely still. Rochelle knew that stillness. It was the same way her mother had frozen when they'd heard about Martin Luther King's assassination. The same stillness that preceded storms. "Mama!" Miss Laverne stepped back inside and closed the door with deliberate care. "There's a brick on our porch," she said, her voice steady but tight with fury. "Just sitting there, neat as you please, like someone's calling card." The kitchen clock ticked past 2 a.m. as Rochelle pressed a fresh ice pack against her throbbing temple. Her laptop's glow cast harsh shadows across the scattered deposit slips and bank statements covering the table. Miss Laverne had finally agreed to rest, but only after Rochelle promised to wake her if anything changed. "I need clarity," Rochelle muttered to herself, pulling up the city's public records database. Years of working with financial documents had taught her that money always left traces, and systems revealed their secrets through patterns. The brick on their porch wasn't just intimidation. It was a signature, a reminder of something bigger. Her fingers moved methodically across the keyboard, pulling records into organized spreadsheets. Towing contract amounts jumped significantly 3 years ago when the department switched vendors. Rochelle noted the company name, Pinnacle Recovery Services. She cross-referenced it against property records and found a shell corporation leading to another shell, until finally landing on a familiar developer, Westbrook Holdings. "Show me your skeleton," she whispered, diving deeper into the numbers. Civil asset forfeiture totals had spiked in specific neighborhoods, always following the same pattern. First came increased traffic stops, then code enforcement sweeps, then property seizures. Within months, Westbrook Holdings would acquire the abandoned properties at auction prices. The pain in Rochelle's head pulsed with each new discovery. She took small sips of water, knowing she couldn't risk stronger pain medication. She needed her mind sharp, her thoughts precise. The patrol car had finally left their street, but the weight of being watched remained. A search for code violations revealed another pattern. Citations clustered heavily around one particular corridor. the same area where she'd been assaulted. The shuttered storefront with its brick wall appeared repeatedly in violation reports, but never seemed to face actual consequences. "What makes you so special?" Rochelle murmured, zooming in on the property details. The ownership history was a maze of LLCs, but one name caught her attention: Pike Development Group. Her breath caught. Sergeant Pike's connection wasn't just through the department. He was part of the real estate machine. She opened a new tab and searched community forums, looking for local discussions. The posts she found made her skin crawl. "Stay away from Marshall Street if they follow you. That wall ain't friendly. The wall got my cousin last week. No witnesses, just bruises. They take you to brick if you talk back. Everyone knows, but nobody says. Don't argue by the storefront. You won't win." Each post ended abruptly, trailing off into digital silence. Nobody named names. Nobody filed formal complaints. The fear was visible in the careful language, the way people talked around the truth instead of directly at it. Rochelle created a timeline spreadsheet, mapping every data point she could verify: traffic stop locations, arrest reports, property transfers, code violations. The pattern wasn't random harassment, it was systematic displacement. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized her own client records intersected with their operation. Several of her tax clients owned properties in the target zones. Their financial records showed surprising cash deposits followed by sudden moves or property sales. She'd flagged these transactions months ago as unusual, but hadn't seen the bigger picture. Now the pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. "They're not just hurting people," she said aloud, her voice tight. "They're pushing them out. The wall is just the visible part." She began composing an email to Mercer, organizing her findings into clear, irrefutable evidence. Her training as a bookkeeper helped her present the data in a way that showed the pattern without requiring interpretation. Numbers didn't lie, and these numbers told a story of coordinated abuse. The kitchen grew colder as night stretched toward dawn. Rochelle heard Miss Laverne stirring upstairs but kept working. She attached documentation methodically: spreadsheets, property records, forum screenshots, financial transfers. Each piece reinforced the others, building a framework too solid to dismiss as coincidence. Her final summary was precise. Agent Mercer, pattern indicates coordinated effort between department members and Westbrook Holdings, Pike Development Group, to facilitate property acquisition through systematic harassment and civil asset forfeiture. Attached evidence shows my client records accidentally intersect with their target zones. This may explain today's escalation. Timeline and supporting documents attached. She double-checked each attachment, making sure the file names were clear and the data was properly organized. The sky outside had begun to lighten, painting the kitchen walls in gradual shades of gray. Her head still throbbed, but the pain felt distant compared to the weight of what she'd uncovered. Rochelle saw the first ray of sunlight break over the horizon as her finger hovered over the send button. The evidence was damning, and she knew sending it would escalate everything. But she hadn't built her reputation on staying quiet when things were wrong. She hit send. In the new morning silence, she heard it clearly: the sound of a car door closing outside, slow and deliberate, like someone taking their time. Mid-morning light filtered weakly through the church basement's narrow windows as Rochelle carefully made her way down the worn steps. Her head still ached from yesterday's assault, but she refused to show weakness. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across metal folding chairs arranged in a tight circle. Pastor Irene Caldwell stood at the door, her presence both welcoming and watchful. She greeted each person with a firm handshake and knowing eyes, positioning trusted deacons near the exits. The basement filled slowly with familiar faces: seniors who'd lived through segregation, small business owners, parents of teenagers who'd had run-ins with the police. "We're here to speak truth," Pastor Caldwell announced, her voice carrying authority without force. Not for drama, not for show, but because silence serves the wrong side. Rochelle took her seat, grateful for the solid metal beneath her. Miss Laverne settled beside her, ramrod straight, her hands folded in her lap like she was preparing for testimony. The circle filled with quiet determination. These weren't protesters or activists, just people who'd reached their limit. "I'm Rochelle Gaines," she began, keeping her voice steady. "Yesterday, 2 officers slammed my head into a brick wall near First National Bank. But I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here because what happened to me is part of something bigger, something systematic. I need to hear your stories, dates, places, details, not for revenge, but for justice." The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then Mrs. Thompson, who'd run the corner store for 30 years, cleared her throat. "3 months ago," she said, "they came into my shop, said they had reports of illegal cigarette sales, turned everything upside down, found nothing, but they laughed the whole time. That same awful laugh. When they left, one of them, tall one, always grinning, said they'd keep the video for their collection." Rochelle noted the date and description, her pen moving steadily across her notebook. "Did they mention anything about a wall?" "Not then," Mrs. Thompson replied. "But 2 weeks later, when my grandson was walking home from basketball practice, the stories began flowing, each one carrying its own weight of fear and fury. Mr. Jackson, retired postal worker, described watching officers pin his neighbor against familiar brick while someone filmed. Sarah, who owned the laundromat, talked about mysterious code violations that disappeared after she sold her building to Westbrook Holdings at half its value. "They got this thing," said Jerome Williams, a former city clerk who'd retired last year. "Heard them talking about it in the break room. They call it the Wall Book." His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "It's not official evidence. It's their private collection. Videos, photos, all the people they've hurt. They use it to keep folks quiet, because who wants their worst moment shared around?" Rochelle's pen moved faster. "Did you ever see this collection?" "No, but I heard them laugh about it. They'd say things like, 'That's going in the book,' or 'Wait till the boys see this one.' Always that same laugh, like it was all some big joke." Pastor Caldwell moved around the circle, offering water and quiet encouragement. The stories continued, each one different, but sharing common threads. The same brick wall, the same towing company showing up suspiciously fast, the same pattern of harassment followed by property pressure. "May I record your testimonies?" Rochelle asked. "We'll need signed statements eventually, but voice recordings help capture details while they're fresh." Heads nodded. One by one, people spoke into Rochelle's phone, giving dates, times, badge numbers when they had them. Miss Laverne remained silent throughout, but her presence spoke volumes. A living link to past struggles, watching the next generation refuse to back down. An elderly deacon named Mr. Foster described watching officers high-five after an arrest, saying something about "another one for the highlight reel." A young mother detailed how her traffic stop turned into a vehicle seizure, forcing her to sell her house to pay impound fees. "Always pinnacle recovery that shows up," she said, "like they know exactly when to come." The meeting stretched past noon. Rochelle's notebook filled with names, dates, and patterns that matched her late-night research. More importantly, she had people willing to go on record, tired of being afraid, ready to stand with her. "This isn't over," Pastor Caldwell warned as the meeting wound down. "They'll push back harder when they realize we're organizing." "We've been pushed before," Miss Laverne spoke for the first time, her voice carrying decades of determination. "We're still here." People lingered, exchanging phone numbers and quiet words of support. Rochelle carefully packed her notes and recordings, making sure each detail was properly labeled. The testimony would need to be organized, verified, and matched against her financial findings, but it was a solid start. The basement slowly emptied, people leaving in small groups rather than all at once, a habit born of long experience. Pastor Caldwell stayed by the door, watching each departure with protective attention. When Rochelle finally stepped out into the parking lot, the midday sun felt harsh after the basement's dim lighting. She walked carefully to her car, her head still tender from yesterday's assault. As she reached for her keys, movement caught her eye. A man she didn't recognize was crouched near her rear bumper, his phone clearly aimed at her license plate. Their eyes met for just a moment before he straightened and walked quickly to a waiting sedan. The car pulled away smoothly, unhurried, like they wanted her to know they weren't afraid of being seen. Rochelle eased her car through downtown traffic, maintaining 3 vehicles between herself and the patrol car up ahead. Her hands were steady on the wheel despite the lingering headache from yesterday's assault. The black and white cruiser moved with predatory patience, and behind it rolled a familiar Pinnacle recovery tow truck, the same company that kept appearing in her financial records. She'd positioned her phone in a low mount on the dashboard, angled carefully to capture the street while remaining discreet. The camera recorded silently as they crossed into what her research identified as a target-rich corridor, blocks where property transfers and foreclosures clustered like wounds on a map. The patrol car's lights flashed to life. A weathered Honda pulled over, its driver already showing hands at 10 and 2. Rochelle passed slowly, then parked half a block away with a clear view in her mirrors. The tow truck stopped even closer, its driver lounging against the cab with practiced indifference. 2 officers approached the Honda with the casual confidence of performers who knew their lines by heart. Rochelle zoomed her camera slightly, ensuring faces were clear. The driver, young, possibly Latino, wearing work clothes, stepped out as instructed, hands visible, movements careful. The first search was textbook, thorough, professional, empty-handed. They checked the trunk, the engine compartment, under seats. Nothing. The driver's shoulders relaxed slightly. Then came the choreographed moment that made Rochelle's jaw clench. One officer turned away from the car, his body blocking the view from passing traffic. When he turned back, the second search began immediately. "What's this?" The officer's voice carried clearly, filled with manufactured surprise. He emerged from the back seat holding a small bag that hadn't been there moments before. The driver's face transformed from confusion to terror. "That's not mine. You already searched there. There was nothing." "Sir, please step back," the first officer said, tone professionally blank. "The vehicle is being seized under suspicion of criminal activity." "No, please. I need my car for work. You can't." The driver's protests hit a wall of practiced indifference. Rochelle's fingers whitened on her phone as she recorded the tow truck moving into position with swift efficiency. This wasn't a random stop. It was a performance they'd refined through repetition. The officers maintained perfect composure while the driver's life unraveled in real time. She watched the Honda rise onto the flatbed, her camera catching every detail. The driver's desperate gestures, the officer's relaxed postures, the tow operator's casual expertise. The entire scene played out like a well-rehearsed dance number where only one person didn't know the steps. More patrol cars arrived, presumably to handle the arrest processing. Rochelle saw the familiar bulge of a trophy cam on one officer's vest, another piece of evidence for their private collection. She wondered how many similar videos filled their wall book, how many lives they'd derailed for profit. The driver was cuffed and placed in a cruiser, his expression haunted. He'd lose his car to impound fees, miss work, possibly lose his job. Then the property pressure would start. The same pattern she'd traced through dozens of cases. The machine kept turning, converting human suffering into real estate opportunities. Rochelle waited until the scene cleared before starting her engine. She pulled away slowly, taking a circuitous route to avoid attention. Her mind catalogued connection points. The towing company's appearance before the evidence was found. The officers' practiced movements. The location's alignment with developer purchases. Each detail strengthened the pattern she'd uncovered in her late-night research. She drove several blocks beyond her comfort zone before finding a quiet side street to park. Her hands shook slightly as she checked the recording. Clear, steady footage that showed the entire sequence. The video couldn't be explained away as misunderstanding or justified by procedure. It was proof of methodology. Rochelle opened Mercer's secure upload link and started the file transfer. The progress bar moved with agonizing slowness. She watched the percentage climb, remembering the driver's face as his world collapsed. 10%. 20%. Her mirror check became almost obsessive, watching for patrol cars. The upload reached 40% as a delivery truck passed, making her flinch. 50%. She could feel her pulse in the stitches on her scalp. 60%. A car slowed nearby, and her heart stuttered until she saw it was just someone parallel parking. The progress bar hit 70%. Rochelle's phone felt hot in her hands. 80%. She thought about Miss Laverne at home, probably worried sick. 90%. Almost there. Another mirror check. Clear streets. 95%. The upload completed with a soft chime. Rochelle verified the file had transferred correctly, then cleared her phone's local copy. She sat for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the weight of what she'd captured settle in her chest. This wasn't just about her assault anymore. It was about dismantling a machine built to devour people's lives. She waited several more minutes, ensuring no one had followed her, before starting her car again. The camera stayed mounted but inactive, ready to record if needed. Rochelle merged back into traffic, heading away from the corridor where another life had just been fed into Pike's profit mill. The evening light slanted through Rochelle's living room windows, painting long shadows across the floor. Miss Laverne stood like a sentinel near the curtains, her shoulders tense as she monitored the quiet street. Rochelle's phone buzzed. Mercer's number. "The footage you sent is exactly what we needed," Mercer said, his voice carrying the first hint of satisfaction she'd heard since this began. Clean, clear documentation of their methodology. The timestamp alignment with the towing company's arrival is particularly damning. Rochelle sank onto her couch, pressing an ice pack against her still-throbbing temple. They didn't even try to hide it. They're so used to getting away with it that they don't bother being careful anymore. "That's how we get them," Mercer replied. "Arrogance makes them sloppy. This video, combined with your financial analysis and the pattern data, it's enough for expanded warrants. We can start digging into their whole operation." "So, it's really happening?" Rochelle asked, letting herself feel a flutter of hope. "We're finally going to expose everything?" "We're moving forward. The judge is reviewing our request now. Pike and his crew won't be able to—" Mercer's voice cut off as another call beeped through. "I need to take this," Rochelle said. "It's blocked. Might be important." She switched lines, and a familiar voice slid through the phone like oil on water. "Ms. Gaines," Sergeant Pike said softly. "I think it's time we had a conversation about finding a better path forward." Miss Laverne turned from the window, reading the change in Rochelle's posture. Rochelle put the phone on speaker so her mother could witness everything. "This situation has gotten unnecessarily complicated," Pike continued, his tone professionally concerned. "There's still room for a reset here, a way to put things right that works for everyone." "What exactly are you suggesting, Sergeant?" Rochelle kept her voice neutral, remembering Mercer's warnings about documented conversations. "I'm suggesting we find a reasonable compromise. Your business is important to the community. Your mother's been a respected resident for decades. It would be unfortunate if technical violations or regulatory oversight started causing problems." Miss Laverne's face hardened, but she remained silent, letting Rochelle handle it. "The federal investigation is proceeding, Sergeant," Rochelle said evenly. "I'm not in a position to affect that. Come now, Ms. Gaines. We both know your cooperation is driving their case. Without your continued involvement, things would naturally settle. Your charges could be reviewed. Your business could operate without unnecessary scrutiny. Your mother wouldn't have to worry about late-night disturbances." Rochelle's free hand clenched into a fist, but she kept her tone steady. "I appreciate you reaching out, Sergeant Pike, but I have nothing further to discuss." She ended the call before anger could crack her composure. Miss Laverne moved to the couch, placing a steadying hand on Rochelle's shoulder. "You did right, baby. Man like that, his gentle voice is more dangerous than his shouting." Before Rochelle could respond, red and blue lights splashed across the living room walls. 2 patrol cars pulled up sharply, officers emerging with practiced urgency. "Rocky Gaines!" a voice boomed through the door. "Police! We have a warrant!" Rochelle opened the door before they could break it down. 4 officers pushed past her, brandishing a warrant that looked official enough. 2 headed straight for her small home office, while the others kept her and Miss Laverne contained in the living room. "This warrant alleges financial fraud," one officer announced, sounding almost bored. "We're seizing relevant documents and evidence." Rochelle watched helplessly as they invaded her office, pulling client files from cabinets and photographing everything on her walls: tax licenses, certifications, even personal photos. They worked with mechanical efficiency, like they'd rehearse this moment. "I want my lawyer present," Rochelle stated firmly. "I do not consent to this search beyond the warrant's scope." The lead officer smirked, Pike's influence evident in every deliberate movement. "Your lawyer can meet you at the station. You're under arrest for suspected financial crimes." They cuffed her in full view of the gathering neighbors, making a show of it. Miss Laverne stood in the doorway, straight-backed and dignified despite her fear. "Call Pastor Caldwell," Rochelle called to her mother as they led her away. "Then call the number I gave you." The ride to the station passed in a blur of procedural humiliation. Fingerprints, booking photos, property surrender. They placed her in a holding cell well past midnight, the buzzing fluorescent lights making her headache spike. A guard paused near her cell, keys jingling softly. "They really don't want you talking," he said quietly, almost apologetically, before continuing his rounds. Rochelle sat on the hard bench, her wrists raw from the cuffs they'd only just removed. The cell's cold air raised goosebumps on her arms, but she refused to wrap herself in the thin blanket they'd provided. She wouldn't show weakness, wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her diminished. The lights buzzed endlessly overhead, their steady drone mixing with distant voices and the occasional clang of metal doors. Every sound echoed off concrete walls, creating a symphony of institutional power. The same power that had slammed her head against brick in broad daylight, that had planted evidence in an innocent man's car, that was now trying to bury her under false charges. She closed her eyes against the harsh lighting but kept her spine straight. They wanted her broken, wanted her to regret standing up, wanted her to wish she'd taken Pike's offer of a reset. But with each passing minute under those buzzing lights, Rochelle's resolve only hardened. They didn't understand. She wasn't trapped in here with them. They were trapped in here with the truth she carried. The fluorescent lights in the jail's visitation room buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the scratched plexiglass barrier. Rochelle sat on a hard plastic chair, her temples still throbbing from the brick wall impact days ago. On the other side, Miss Laverne and Pastor Caldwell studied her face, their concern evident but controlled. "How you holding up, baby?" Miss Laverne asked, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "I'm okay, Mama," Rochelle answered, forcing herself to sit straighter. The orange jumpsuit felt like a costume designed to strip away dignity, but she refused to slump. "Don't you let this place shrink you," Miss Laverne said, reading her daughter's thoughts. "That's what they want, for you to feel small, to feel shame. But shame ain't yours to carry. It belongs to them." Pastor Caldwell nodded, her usually warm features set in grim determination. "The community's behind you, Rochelle. Those seniors from our meeting. They're ready to sign sworn statements about what happened to them. Every single one." "That's something," Rochelle said, but her voice carried a note of weariness. "What about the court situation?" The pastor's expression tightened. "We found a local attorney willing to take this on, Marcus Thompson. Good reputation, strong trial record. But," she hesitated, "but what?" "The court clerk pulled me aside this morning, said we should know. Judge Harrison has regular golf games with Pike. Been friends for 20 years. Rochelle absorbed this, her jaw clenching. "Of course they are." "There's more," Miss Laverne added. "That FBI agent of yours, Mercer. They found a way to sideline him, at least temporarily." "What do you mean?" "Someone filed an ethics complaint against him," Pastor Caldwell explained, "claiming he showed bias in previous cases. It's nonsense, but it triggered an automatic review. He's been temporarily reassigned pending investigation." The news hit Rochelle like another slam against the wall. Mercer had been her strongest ally, the one person who truly understood the scope of Pike's operation. Without him, "They're trying to isolate you," Miss Laverne said softly. "Cut you off from help while they build their case." Rochelle glanced at the security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. "What's happening outside?" Pastor Caldwell's face darkened. The news ran with the fraud arrest angle. Big headlines about local tax preparer charged. They're painting you as someone who betrayed community trust. "Social media's worse," Miss Laverne added. "They're dragging your business name through dirt, posting old complaints, probably fake ones, making it look like there's a pattern." Rochelle felt the weight of it all pressing down, the charges, the smear campaign, the systematic dismantling of her life's work. Pike was suffocating her with paperwork and procedure, turning the system's machinery against her with practiced skill. "But we've got good news, too," Pastor Caldwell said, leaning forward. "The church community pulled together. Between donations and a few larger pledges, we've raised your bail money." "You didn't have to do that," Rochelle protested. "Yes, we did," Miss Laverne cut in. "Because you stood up. Because you showed what one person's truth can do to their whole corrupt machine. And because if we let them bury you, ain't nobody else ever gonna dare speak up again." A guard approached, signaling their time was almost up. Rochelle pressed her palm against the glass, matching her mother's hand on the other side. "You listen to me," Miss Laverne said intensely. "You got steel in your spine and fire in your heart. That's why they're scared. That's why they're throwing everything at you. Don't you let them dim your light." Pastor Caldwell touched Miss Laverne's shoulder. "The bail paperwork's being processed now. You should be out within the hour." Rochelle nodded, her mind already working through possibilities. They wanted to isolate her, to bury her under charges and paperwork until she broke or pled guilty. But she wasn't going to wait for rescue or hope for fairness. She would force their hand, make them commit new crimes where cameras could see. "Tell Marcus I'll need to meet with him as soon as I'm out," she said. "And Pastor, those seniors who want to sign affidavits, have them wait. We might need their testimony for something bigger." The guard stepped closer. "Time's up." Rochelle stood, rolling her shoulders back. I love you, Mama. I'll see you soon. An hour later, Rochelle walked through the jail's processing area, reclaiming her personal belongings. Each item felt like a piece of herself being restored: her watch, her earrings, her dignity. She signed the final release forms and pushed through the heavy doors into the morning sun. Miss Laverne and Pastor Caldwell waited by the curb, along with a small group of church members who had helped raise the bail money. The sunlight felt harsh after hours under fluorescent bulbs, but Rochelle didn't squint or shield her eyes. She walked tall, letting them see she wasn't broken. Miss Laverne wrapped her in a fierce hug, then held her at arm's length to study her face. "You got that look," she said. "The one that means you're planning something?" Rochelle met her mother's gaze steadily. "They want me quiet," she said, her voice carrying to the small crowd of supporters. "So, I'm going to make them loud." Back in her own clothes, Rochelle stood on the jail steps with Miss Laverne and Pastor Caldwell beside her, surrounded by church members who had come to show support. The morning sun felt strange on her skin after the artificial lighting inside, but she welcomed its warmth. "Let's get you home first," Miss Laverne said, her hand firm on Rochelle's elbow. "You need real food and rest before anything else." "No time," Rochelle replied, though her body ached for exactly that. "We need to move while they think they've got me scared." Pastor Caldwell gestured to her car. "At least let me drive you. We can talk strategy on the way." They settled into the pastor's weathered sedan, Rochelle in the back where she could stretch her stiff muscles. The jail's concrete walls receded in the rearview mirror as they merged into morning traffic. "Marcus Thompson called while you were processing out," Pastor Caldwell said, glancing back. "He's cleared his morning schedule. Says we need to review the charges in detail before they try pushing for a quick plea deal." "They'll dangle a misdemeanor," Rochelle said, remembering patterns from her tax work. "Make it sound reasonable compared to the felony charges they're threatening. But accepting any plea means I lose my business license permanently." Miss Laverne turned in her seat. "That whole fraud case is built on air. They're claiming you helped clients hide income?" "They seized specific files," Rochelle explained, "all from small business owners in that same corridor where the towing numbers spiked. The timing's not accidental." "Of course not," Pastor Caldwell agreed. "They're trying to discredit you before you can expose their operation." Classic intimidation playbook. Through the windshield, Rochelle watched people going about their morning routines, opening shops, waiting for buses, living normal lives untouched by the machinery grinding beneath the city's surface. She thought about the seniors in the church basement, finding courage to share their stories, about the man whose car was seized, his confusion as officers planted evidence, about Haskins' laugh as her head hit brick. "Pike's team isn't just cruel," she said slowly. "They're efficient. Every move serves multiple purposes. The fraud charges don't just pressure me. They create a paper trail they can use to question my credibility if this goes to court." "Speaking of paper trails," Pastor Caldwell said, "what exactly did they take from your office?" "Client files, tax records, my work computer. But they won't find what they want." Rochelle allowed herself a small smile. "I've been backing everything up to secure cloud storage since I started helping Mercer. And I keep the most sensitive materials in a safe deposit box." "Smart girl," Miss Laverne murmured. "But they'll spin that too, say you're hiding evidence." "Let them," Rochelle said. "The more they push, the more patterns emerge. Pike's crew has gotten sloppy because they're used to controlling the narrative. But they've never dealt with someone who knows how paper trails really work." Pastor Caldwell navigated through downtown traffic, passing the bank where everything had started just days ago. The brick wall came into view. Rochelle's stomach tightened, but she made herself look directly at it. Yellow police tape still marked the scene where federal agents had arrested Rudd and Haskins. "They've already lost 2 officers," Pastor Caldwell noted. "Pike must be feeling pressure from above." That's why the retaliation was so fast, Rochelle agreed. He needs to make an example before others start talking, but he's overplaying his hand. How so? Miss Laverne asked. Think about it. Within days of his officers being arrested, I'm suddenly charged with fraud. The timing's too obvious, and he's using the same tactics we see in the pattern. Sudden arrests, seized property, pressure to plead guilty. He's actually helping document his own playbook. They pulled into the parking lot of Marcus Thompson's law office, a modest brick building that had clearly seen better days. Through the front window, Rochelle could see the attorney already waiting, file folders spread across his desk. Before we go in, Miss Laverne said, "Tell me straight, what's your real plan? Because I know that look. You're not just playing defense." Rochelle met her mother's eyes in the rearview mirror. Pike's crew has 3 weaknesses. First, they're arrogant. They think intimidation always works. Second, they're greedy. They can't resist adding to their collection of victims. And third, they're used to controlling all the cameras. And, Pastor Caldwell prompted, and I'm going to use all 3 against them. We're not just gathering evidence anymore. We're going to force them to perform their whole operation in front of witnesses they can't silence. Miss Laverne studied her daughter's face. That's dangerous. So is letting them continue, Rochelle countered. How many more people get hurt if we don't stop this now? How many more lives do they get to ruin while we wait for the system to work? Pastor Caldwell turned off the engine. The seniors from church. They're ready to help. Whatever you need. I know, Rochelle said. But first, we need to handle these charges. Pike thinks he's got me trapped in paperwork, fighting to save my business. He's not expecting me to use that pressure as cover. She reached for the door handle, then paused. Mama, I need you to trust me on this. I know it's scary, but I've thought it through. Pike's crew has to be exposed in a way they can't spin or bury. Miss Laverne reached back and squeezed her daughter's hand. I've always trusted you. That's not what scares me. It's knowing how far they'll go to keep their power. Rochelle nodded, understanding flowing between them without words. She stepped out into the morning sun, adjusted her jacket, and turned to Miss Laverne. They want me quiet, she said firmly. So I'm going to make them loud. Night air hung thick in the parking garage, each footstep echoing off concrete as Rochelle walked purposefully toward level 3. The decoy drive pressed against her thigh through her pocket, and her phone recorded steadily from inside her purse, its screen dark but capturing everything. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, creating pools of harsh illumination between long shadows. Rochelle had chosen this garage carefully. It was well lit, had multiple cameras, and sat within quick response range of both local police and federal offices. She'd made sure Mercer knew her location without tipping off Pike's crew. Her heartbeat quickened as she rounded the corner toward the meeting spot. The mid-level officer she'd arranged to meet, someone she suspected might crack under pressure, was nowhere in sight. Instead, 2 men emerged from behind a concrete pillar with the fluid movement of predators. They wore civilian clothes, but Rochelle recognized the trademark department haircuts and the way they carried themselves, the casual arrogance of badges, even when they weren't wearing them. A third figure lingered near the stairwell door, standing half in shadow. He didn't move closer, just watched with the detached interest of someone overseeing an operation. The stance reminded her of Pike. "Hand it over," the first off-duty cop said, closing the distance. His hand shot out and clamped around her wrist, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "The drive. Now!" The second man circled behind her, and Rochelle felt her throat tighten as he grabbed for her arms. The position was too familiar, like the brick wall all over again. She could almost hear Haskins laughing. Fear surged through her body, but it crystallized into something harder. something that had been building since that first slam against brick. She would not be their victim again. Not here. Not anywhere. Last chance, the first man growled, twisting her wrist. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Rochelle's response was instant and savage. She drove her keys up between her fingers, raking them across the man's forearm. He jerked back with a curse, loosening his grip just enough. She stomped down hard on the second man's instep, feeling something crack under her heel. The man behind her tried to lock his arms around her chest, but Rochelle dropped her weight and drove her elbow back into his ribs with every ounce of strength she had. His grip faltered as air rushed from his lungs. They hadn't expected her to fight. That was their first mistake. The first man lunged for her again, but Rochelle was already moving. She slammed her head back into his face when he tried to grab her, feeling the crunch of cartilage. Blood sprayed as he staggered. Her purse strap tangled around her arm as she twisted away, but she kept it close. The recording had to survive. The man from the stairwell started forward now, shouting something she couldn't hear over the blood rushing in her ears. Rochelle spun toward the nearest emergency exit, knowing the door's alarm would add to the chaos. As she reached for the push bar, the second man grabbed her jacket. She turned with the motion, using his momentum to slam him into the door. The bar caught him just below the knee with a satisfying crack. His scream echoed off concrete as he collapsed. The first man was up again, blood streaming from his nose, rage replacing professional detachment. He rushed her with hands outstretched for her throat. Rochelle met his charge with a brutal palm strike to his already broken nose, driving upward with everything she had. He dropped like a stone, gagging and clutching his face. Running footsteps echoed from multiple directions, reinforcements coming to help their friends. But Rochelle had planned for this too. She sprinted toward the section of the garage she knew had the best camera coverage, her shoes slapping against concrete as she pulled the emergency alarm on her phone. The third man, the watcher, tried to cut her off, reaching for something under his jacket. Rochelle didn't give him time. She swung her purse like a flail, the heavy strap catching him across the face. As he stumbled, she drove her knee up into his groin with enough force to lift him off his feet. More footsteps pounded up the ramps, but these were different. The coordinated movement of tactical teams. Federal sirens pierced the garage's relative quiet, their echoes bouncing off every surface. Rochelle backed toward a concrete pillar, keeping all approaches in view. Her hands shook with adrenaline, and she could taste blood where she'd bit her cheek during the fight. But she stayed upright, kept her stance wide and balanced, ready for anyone else who might try their luck. The garage filled with shouted commands and the thunder of boots as federal agents swarmed the level. Tactical lights swept the scene, illuminating the aftermath. One man still curled around his crushed nose, another clutching his knee and moaning, the third trying unsuccessfully to crawl away from the evidence of his participation. "Miss Gaines!" A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Agent Mercer, moving toward her with controlled urgency. "Are you all right?" Rochelle nodded, not trusting her voice yet. She watched as agents secured the three men, efficiently zip-tying wrists behind backs and photographing faces for identification. Her phone was still recording in her purse, catching every moment of Pike's failed trap turning back on itself. The adrenaline started to ebb, leaving her muscles trembling. But she stayed standing, refused to show weakness. Blood dripped from her scraped knuckles onto the concrete, but it wasn't her blood that would prove most damaging tonight. Rochelle pulled the emergency blanket tighter around her shoulders, watching red and blue lights strobe across the parking garage's concrete walls. Her knuckles stung where the EMT had just finished cleaning them, but she refused additional treatment. She needed to stay alert. 20 feet away, Mercer stood with his jacket open, badge visible on his belt. conferring intensely with a federal tactical team leader. Their voices were low, but their postures radiated controlled urgency. More agents moved purposefully through the scene, photographing evidence and scanning the garage's security cameras. "Ma'am?" A young agent approached, holding up an evidence bag containing her phone. "We've secured the recording. Do you need a replacement device for now?" Rochelle shook her head. "Keep it. Just make sure nothing happens to that footage." "Multiple backups already running," the agent assured her. "The video quality is excellent. We can see everything clearly." That was the first piece of good news. Rochelle watched as the three attackers were loaded into separate vehicles, each one photographed and documented. The third man, the watcher who'd stayed back initially, seemed particularly agitated now, demanding a phone call with increasing desperation. Mercer broke away from his conversation and walked over to where Rochelle sat. His expression was focused, but carried a hint of satisfaction she hadn't seen before. "The third suspect," he said without preamble, "is Thomas Reeves. He works as a consultant for Landmark Development Group." Rochelle's eyes widened slightly. That was the developer's name that kept appearing in her research, tied to property transfers after suspicious arrests. "His phone?" she asked. "Better than we hoped," Mercer replied. "He didn't have time to wipe it. We have text messages ordering him to secure the drive from you tonight, using whatever force necessary. Messages that trace directly back to Pike's inner circle and the developer's office." "They really thought I was stupid enough to bring the real drive," Rochelle said, a hint of dark amusement in her voice. "Their arrogance worked in our favor. This was a coordinated criminal act, caught on multiple cameras, with clear electronic evidence of premeditation. It gives us probable cause for immediate warrants." Mercer checked his watch. "Teams are moving now." As if to confirm his words, more federal vehicles pulled out of the garage, lights dark, heading in different directions. Rochelle knew they were targeting Pike's storage unit, his office, and the towing company's facilities. All the locations she'd helped identify through her research. "We need to get you to a secure location for your official statement," Mercer continued. "Your attorney is already en route. Nothing gets recorded without them present." Rochelle nodded and stood carefully, muscles protesting after the fight. An agent led her to an unmarked SUV with tinted windows. As they drove through the night-quiet streets, she saw more federal vehicles converging on their targets like silent hunters. The secure location turned out to be a federal building's interview room, but not the stark interrogation boxes shown on TV. This one had comfortable chairs, good lighting, and recording equipment already running. Her attorney, arranged through Pastor Caldwell's connections, was waiting with a notepad and sharp eyes. "Ms. Gaines," the lawyer said warmly, "I'm here to ensure everything stays properly documented. Take your time, stay hydrated, and we'll get your statement done right." Over the next 2 hours, Rochelle detailed everything methodically. The original assault at the wall, her research, the community testimonies, and tonight's attack. The lawyer watched the federal agents carefully, but they maintained strict protocol, recording every word properly. During a brief break, Mercer stepped out to take a call. When he returned, his usually composed face showed rare emotion. "They found it," he said simply. "The wall book. Multiple encrypted drives in Pike's storage unit, plus physical folders. Exactly where you said it would be." Rochelle's hands tightened on her water bottle. "The videos? Hundreds of them. All catalogued by date and location. They—" Mercer paused, jaw working. "They treated it like a trophy collection. Each victim documented, laughing clearly audible on the recordings, faces pressed against that same brick wall. Some videos show the same victims multiple times, suggesting ongoing harassment." A tech agent brought in a laptop, pulling up a secured folder. "Ms. Gaines, we need you to verify this is the same wall location from your assault." Rochelle forced herself to watch a few seconds of footage. The brick pattern was identical. She recognized the worn spots, the distinctive mortar lines. The sounds of laughter made her stomach turn, and she had to look away. "That's it," she said firmly. "Same wall, same officers, same laugh." The lawyer made careful notes while Mercer conferred with his team. Evidence bags continued arriving. Ledgers showing payment records, burner phones filled with incriminating messages, small cameras that matched the one taken from Haskins' vest that first day. "The towing company's records are particularly damaging," Mercer explained. "They document the whole pipeline, which cars were targeted, which properties were pressured into sale after arrests. The developer's involvement is clear." Around 4 a.m., Rochelle finished her statement. Her attorney reviewed every page while agents prepared secure transport to take her home. The night felt surreal, like all the pieces they'd been gathering had finally aligned into an unbreakable chain. As dawn began turning the sky gray, Rochelle's phone buzzed, a new temporary one provided by the federal team. Mercer's name appeared on the screen. She answered, and his voice carried a weight of certainty she'd been waiting months to hear. "We have enough to take Pike today." Dawn broke over the municipal building as news vans jostled for position, their satellite dishes raised like metal flowers catching first light. Rochelle stood just behind the podium line, her bruises still visible but her spine straight. Miss Laverne's hand rested steady on her arm, while Pastor Caldwell maintained a protective presence to her left. Her attorney kept checking his phone, coordinating with federal officials, while Mercer stood slightly apart, his badge catching sunlight. Camera crews pressed forward, microphones extended like accusing fingers. Local reporters who'd run the fraud arrest headlines now shifted uncomfortably, sensing the story had turned. The morning air felt electric with anticipation. "This isn't about revenge," Rochelle whispered to Miss Laverne. "This is about truth coming to light." Miss Laverne squeezed her arm. "Truth's been waiting a long time for this morning." The U.S. Attorney stepped to the podium, flanked by federal agents. His voice carried across the crowd without need for dramatics. "Today, we are announcing multiple federal indictments following a lengthy civil rights investigation into systematic abuse of power, evidence manipulation, and coordinated intimidation within local law enforcement." Cameras clicked rapid-fire as he detailed the charges: conspiracy, civil rights violations, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and corruption tied to property. Seizures. Each charge landed like a hammer blow against the facade of authority that had protected Pike's crew for years. The investigation revealed an organized criminal enterprise operating under color of law, the U.S. Attorney continued. Officers targeted citizens for harassment and illegal seizures, documenting their actions in what they called the Wall Book, a catalog of abuse used for control and entertainment. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of the older reporters looked sick, finally understanding what they'd missed or ignored. Additionally, we have evidence of coordination between certain officers, a local towing contractor, and Landmark Development Group in a scheme to pressure property sales through targeted arrests and vehicle seizures. Pastor Caldwell whispered a quiet "Amen" as the truth emerged in official voice. Around them, community members who'd shared testimony nodded in grim validation. Movement at the building's side entrance drew attention. Sergeant Vance Pike emerged between two federal agents, his hands cuffed behind his back. His usual polished smile was gone, replaced by tight lips and lowered eyes. The man who'd ruled the department through quiet threat now looked small in the morning light. Cameras swung to capture Pike's perp walk. No special treatment, no back entrance, no dignity preserved. Just the cold click of handcuffs and the flash of photographers documenting his fall. Pike's shoulders hunched as he was guided to a waiting federal vehicle. "Ms. Gaines," a reporter called out. "How do you respond to these developments?" Rochelle's attorney stepped forward. "My client's illegal arrest and the fabricated charges against her have been dismissed with prejudice. The district attorney's office has appropriately recused itself from any related matters due to conflicts of interest." More commotion drew attention to the street. Federal agents were leading the towing company owner from his business in handcuffs, while others carried boxes of documents to waiting vehicles. Simultaneously, news broke that Landmark Development's offices were being raided. The U.S. Attorney continued, "Officers Clay Rudd and Brent Haskins, previously arrested, are now recognized as part of this larger conspiracy. Their law enforcement certifications have been suspended pending permanent decertification proceedings. There will be no quiet transfers, no fresh starts in new departments." Rochelle felt Miss Laverne's grip tighten at those words. How many officers had escaped consequences through that back door, free to abuse power in new towns? "The investigation has identified numerous victims of this conspiracy," the U.S. Attorney added. "We encourage anyone with information about similar incidents to come forward. Federal witness protection protocols are in place." Pastor Caldwell stepped forward to speak, her voice carrying moral weight. "Our community has carried these wounds in silence for too long. Today marks the beginning of healing through justice." The press conference continued as officials detailed the scope of recovered evidence. Hundreds of videos, financial records, text messages, and witness statements, painting a picture of systematic abuse. Each revelation validated the fear people had lived with and the courage it took to finally speak. Mercer maintained his professional distance, but caught Rochelle's eye briefly. This wasn't just about one woman slammed against brick. It was about dismantling a machine that had ground people down for years. Reporters pressed closer, shouting questions. How long has this been going on? How many properties were involved? What about other officers? "Ms. Gaines, will you sue the department?" Rochelle's attorney fielded the questions with practiced skill while she stood tall, letting her presence speak. Her bruises told their own story. Power had tried to break her, but truth proved stronger. The morning stretched on as more details emerged. Federal agents continued moving in and out of the municipal building, carrying boxes and hard drives. Each piece of evidence represented someone's story, finally being heard. When the press conference concluded, Rochelle walked to her car between Miss Laverne and Pastor Caldwell, their steps synchronized in quiet solidarity. The drive home felt different. Streets she'd navigated in fear now opened clear before her. Turning onto her street, Rochelle noticed it first. The space across from her house was empty. The dark cruiser that had kept watch, trying to squeeze her spirit through surveillance, was gone. Only open sky remained where intimidation had perched. She parked in her driveway and sat for a moment, feeling the morning sun warm on her face through the windshield. The street looked different in honest daylight, free from the shadow of corrupt power. Late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the downtown sidewalk as Rochelle approached the brick storefront that had become both symbol and battlefield. The same food cart still steamed nearby, pedestrians still hurried past, and traffic hummed with everyday life. But something fundamental had shifted. Her steps were measured, deliberate, not from lingering injury or fear, but from a determination to own each moment of this walk. Her heels clicked against concrete with quiet authority, each sound belonging to her choice to be here. The brick facade hadn't changed. Red-brown, weathered, indifferent to the pain it had witnessed. But the space around it felt different. No cruisers lurked nearby. No predatory gazes tracked movement. The street breathed easier, as if the city itself was slowly remembering how to exist without the weight of corrupted power. Rochelle stopped just short of the wall, close enough to see the faint discoloration where her blood had marked the brick weeks ago. The memory of laughter echoed, Haskins's cruel amusement, Rudd's satisfied chuckle. But now it felt distant, stripped of its power to wound. Those men sat in cells while their careers crumbled, their authority reduced to orange jumpsuits and visiting hours. She heard Miss Laverne's familiar footsteps approaching from behind, keeping a respectful distance. Her mother's presence felt like an anchor to truth, grounding this moment in something larger than personal vindication. 3 generations of their family had walked these streets under different shadows of injustice. Now one shadow, at least, had been dragged into light. The afternoon sun warmed Rochelle's face as she studied the wall's texture. Each brick, each mortar line, each imperfection that had once pressed against her cheek now revealed itself as simply construction material, no longer a tool of torment. She thought of the wall book, now secured in federal evidence, its contents being used to identify other victims and build more cases. The wall had been their signature, their trophy backdrop, their inside joke. Now it testified against them. A young couple passed by, their conversation falling quiet, as they recognized her from the news. Rochelle felt their eyes but didn't turn. She didn't need to perform this moment for anyone. The consequences had already spoken eloquently enough. Pike in handcuffs, the towing company shuttered, the developers' offices raided, Rudd and Haskins facing years behind bars. The machine they'd built lay in pieces, exposed for what it was. She lifted her hand slowly, feeling the rough texture of brick against her palm. Not in submission this time, but in reclamation. She applied steady pressure, a small gesture that contained the weight of every document she'd gathered, every testimony she'd collected, every piece of evidence that had brought down their enterprise. The wall felt cool against her skin, solid, but no longer threatening. Like power itself, it was only as meaningful as people made it. She remembered Miss Laverne's words from years ago. "Baby, a wall is just something man put up. Truth is what brings it down." Somewhere down the street, a child laughed, bright, uninhibited, free from fear. The sound carried on the afternoon air like hope. Rochelle thought of the community legal defense clinic being established with settlement funds, how it would help others fight back when power turned predatory. The wall had been their stage for dominance, but its shadow would now shelter something stronger. Organized resistance. She exhaled slowly, deliberately, releasing a weight she'd carried since that first impact. The burden hadn't been hers to bear, but she'd shouldered it until truth could catch up. Now justice had spoken through federal indictments, seized evidence, and public accountability. The system that had protected them lay exposed, its machinery of intimidation dismantled in broad daylight. A gentle breeze stirred paper wrappers along the curb. The food cart vendor nodded to her with quiet respect as he served his customers. Life flowed around her, ordinary and unmarked by the significance of this moment. But that was its own kind of victory. The return of simple normalcy, streets free from predatory patrol cars, sidewalks where people could walk without scanning for danger. Rochelle lowered her hand from the wall, her fingertips trailing across the rough surface one last time. She turned to face Miss Laverne, finding her mother's eyes filled with understanding and fierce pride. Miss Laverne nodded once, a gesture that carried the weight of generations who had stood their ground against different walls. The late afternoon light stretched their shadows long against the sidewalk as Rochelle moved away from the wall. Each step felt solid, grounded in earned confidence rather than imposed fear. Miss Laverne fell into step beside her, their pace unhurried and synchronized, claiming the simple right to walk their city's streets in peace. Behind them, the brick wall stood silent in the fading sunlight. Its surface would hold no more trophies, record no more abuse, serve no more corrupt power. It had been restored to its proper place, just brick and mortar, construction material, nothing more. The weight of its history remained, but its power to intimidate had crumbled like old cement. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss.